This is one of our large panels. It's an 81-inch panel. This is for the 42 by 84 raised planter. I've got this setting between two sawhorses. I'll lay it down on the sawhorses. And now I want to show you how much weight this can resist by sitting on it. Over the past 5 years, we've built several of these, and I'm going to show you what we've learned and hopefully the quickest and easiest way to assemble a bed. We have two sawhorses. We have the large panel here. If you're assembling a small bed, you'll just start with a small panel. We're going to lay out some of the parts we need. We've laid out both corner pieces. We've set them at the end. I'm going to go ahead and twist off the nuts from the bolts. This is a really handy way to keep your hardware. Now that I have the hardware on both sides, I'm going to begin assembling. Notice how the carriage bolt works. Notice how it is square on the inside. When we put this through the hole, that square needs to be lined up. And this can easily be done by lining it up before you put it in the hole. There's two reasons we use carriage bolts. The first reason, when you put the carriage bolt in, the bolt is going to hold itself, and you only need a tool for the nut to tighten it. The next reason is it's a rounded surface, and it's a really nice look. Instead of having a hex head stick out, it's a nice rounded surface. So we're going to imagine this is the bottom of the bed. We're going to start on the bottom of the bed. So I'm going to go ahead and put one bolt in. You heard it snap through there. I'm going to tighten it enough that the shoulder of that square stays in there, but I can still move it. From here, I'm going to go ahead and place one of the next two holes. Put the nuts on, tighten them to just where it holds it, but I can still move it. So now that we have the corner on there, you can see that we can still slide the corner back and forth, but it's locked in there. It's not going to rotate. Now that your corner piece is on, you have 3 bolts in. This is your bottom. 1, 2, 3. This one's empty. You can slide it back and forth. Now what we want to do is we want to line the bottom of the corner piece with the bottom of the panel. And so I'm just going to eyeball that. That's lined up. I'm going to tighten this end bolt right here. This bolt's tight. We're lined up on the bottom. So for the purposes of this video, I will be adding a wood kit as we build this. But if you do not add the brackets for the wood kit, you'll simply just put your bolt right through here and tighten. So we're going to add this bracket. It comes with its own set of nuts and bolts, so we can take out of that as we go. We'll put the nuts on the back side, and we want to run the nut up just until it's touching, so we can still move it. So we have our 2 bolts in. We can still slide this. I've lined this bracket up. I'll put my ratchet on here, ready to tighten it. And I'm just going to pull that panel in right there. Now we've got our bracket on. The 2 bolts for the bracket are tightened. This bolt is tightened. Now let's tighten our last 2 in the center. These are 1/4-20 bolts, stainless steel. And when you tighten these, don't He-Man them in. When you tighten the nut, this is all I use. A small ratchet You could do the same thing with a 7/16 wrench. This is all 7/16. When you tighten it, there's not a lot of force that needs to be applied. And when you tighten that nut, the nut has a built-in washer and serrations on it. So as you tighten it, it's going to dig in the metal slightly and actually help it to stop from rotating back in the future. To recap, we put the corner piece on. We put 1, 2, 3 bolts in from the bottom. We made this our bottom. We hand tighten those 3 bolts so we could still slide this back and forth, the corner piece. We moved it to the end, made it even on the bottom, tightened the bottom bolt. We added our wood bracket. If we weren't adding a wood bracket, we would just put a single bolt in here, even the end up, come back here and tighten the 2 center bolts. Now we can do the same thing to the other side and do the same thing to the other panel. Now we have 2 long panels completed with the corners on and a few brackets on each one. Now I'm going to set them on the floor, and I find this best with concrete, but I've built them on gravel and grass. It's just a little easier on concrete. So that's how I suggest it. And these beds, once they're assembled, they're about 70 pounds, but one person can carry them pretty easy, and I'll show you here in a second. So now I'm going to put a short panel in its place, and I'm going to distribute my bolts. We're going to need 5 in each corner here, since we're adding the wood bracket on also. We'll do this the same way we did what was on the sawhorses. We'll start with the lower bolt first, and then we'll put number 2 and number 3 in. We'll tighten the bottom. We'll put our wood bracket on, and then we'll move to the other side. So the first bolt is always going to be the trickiest to get in, but then you've got a pivot point there, and all the rest of the bolts will be super easy to find. So we have the 3 bolts in, and this is important, and it makes everything really easy. Like we spoke about before, when you tighten your nut up, tighten it to where you know that square head has entered the panel. That way it'll move real easy up and down, and we can get everything lined up. So I've got my bottom lined up. I've got the bottom tightened. I've got my bracket. I've got the bolt pushed in it. We'll put that in, put a nut on. When we put this other nut on, you're going to notice that these are almost touching. So when you put it on, remove the bolt a little bit, start your nut on there, make sure your square head is pushed in, and tighten. This will have to be tightened with a pair of pliers or a wrench. Okay, let's recap. Our bottom bolt is tight. Our 2 middle bolts are in, but only hand tight. And we've attached the wood bracket hand tight. So I've got the wood bracket lined up with the top. Our top edge of our panel looks real nice, so I'll go ahead and tighten it there. I'm going to go ahead and tighten our center bolts now. And I'll tighten our last one with a wrench. We'll do the same thing to this side over here. Bottom bolt in, finger tight. The next 2 bolts go in. Number 2, finger tight. It can slide. Bottom bolt tight. Wood bracket on. Slide this corner bolt back just a hair so you can get the nut on. The wood bracket is even. The panel feels good. We're tightening the top bolt. Now we're going to tighten the 2 middle bolts. And we're going to finish it off with the wrench. Now we'll do the same thing to the other end. We finish this end. We finished putting the other panel on, and we added the other brackets for the wood supports. If you were to build these in your garage, which is what I do, then they're pretty easy if you stand inside them. You can move them by yourself. So the total shipping weight on one bed is 70 pounds. So I'd say we've got probably 67 pounds right here. So we're gonna place this in its final resting position. So this is where we've decided to place the bed. We have a video on how to level the bed. We're not gonna go over that here. So when you place the bed, the first thing you're gonna do is make sure the bed is square. So what I do, we'll put a tape measure here. I'm gonna look at the corner and I see 94 inches. Makes no difference what you see, you're just trying to get the numbers the same. I put it on here and I see 94 and a half. So I know if I move it to 94 and a quarter by pressing this corner that way, then it'll make it square, and this side should be 94 and a quarter, and it is. We have the bed squared, it's set in place. Before we add our wood, it's very important to put the soil blockers in. All right, we have 4 soil blockers, 1 for each corner. If you'll notice down here, soil could escape through these spots, these ridges. So we're going to place the soil blocker in from the top with the outside pointing to the center of the bed. So here's our outside corner pointing to the center of the bed. They're going to slide in place and they'll block any soil from entering. Soil blockers are in place. We have our wood cut per the manual. And the easiest way I found to do this is just to set your wood in place on top of the bed and on top of the supports. The wood is going to hang over these brackets by about a ½ inch. So I'm going to get them all hanging over by about a ½ inch just to make this easier for us. I'll lay my components out. These are the miter joint covers. They add a lot of rigidity to this, and I'll show you that. These screws are very nice screws. They have a Torx bit. They have a very thin head on them, which is nice. So if you sit on this, you won't scratch your butt with it. But you see how the bottom is flat? Normally when we screw into wood, the screw is going to go into the wood and kind of tell us when to stop. In this case, when the bottom of this screw head meets the top of this miter joint cover, it will stop. And so be prepared for that, because you can strip these, break the heads off. So be prepared when you're screwing down. Either have a some type of clutch set on your drill, or just be mindful. So to recap, we've got our wood sitting here. We've placed it on approximately where it goes. Doesn't need to be close at this point. Now we're going to start putting our miter covers on. So you can see our miter joint. This wood was cut, probably a few months ago. So the joint's already spread a little bit in there. Plus I cut it with a jigsaw, so it wasn't good to start with. But we're putting this cover on it. So we're going to lay the cover on. And the first thing I want to do is I want to put the side screws in. And the reason is, if I were to put these screws in first, and then put these in and it tried to pull the board over to the side, these may interfere with that. Once the board is pulled this way, we know it's lined up. The same thing with this board. So if both boards are pulled against here, then we know we're 90 degrees and we'll have a really nice look. So I'm just pushing down on the miter cover right here just to make sure it's down all the way. We'll put the screw in, put the other screw in. So I've moved this board a little bit to get it lined up with the edge. And I'm going to add my other screws while I'm pressing down on the miter joint cover. After that's done, I put the 4 top screws in. And then we'll repeat that process with the other 3 corners. Now you have your frame built. It's nice and square. So now we'll attach this to the bed. So we laid all our wood pieces up here. We put our miter joint covers on. We've got a nice square seating area for the bed. Now we want to get this aligned with the bed. And the easiest way, when you reach down here, we have a wood bracket here on this side, and we have one on this side, we have one here, we have one here. They should be hanging off even amounts, which is about a 1/2 inch. So I'm checking both sides. It feels pretty good. Checking that. Yeah, that feels good. Let's go down here. This needs to rotate this way just a little bit. The end feels good. So I'm satisfied that is on there straight enough that I won't be able to tell. Now we're going to attach the wood frame to the bed using the wood support brackets we put on earlier. There's 3 holes in each bracket. I generally just use 2 of them, but we provide enough screws. Now that we've got the bed tipped up, we'll get a better shot of putting screws through the bottom and explain these brackets a little better. So these are the wood support brackets as you would see it from the bottom. The only job of these wood support brackets is to pin the wood down to the bed. So when I say I only put a couple screws in, you can see why. The reason for the 3 holes is if you have a bad spot in your wood, then you can find 2 other places. But we include all the hardware for all the holes. A quick note while we have the bed tipped up, you can see our wood support brackets there, and we'll move on down to the center of the bed. There's 2 holes. Those are not for wood support brackets. We only put a wood support bracket every 7 foot. Those 2 holes are for joining beds together. A quick explanation of the miter joint cover. It's important for 2 reasons. No matter what you do, you cut a perfect joint. When you put that joint outside, it's going to spread. So the less important reason for the miter joint cover is to cover that joint. The more important reason is to give the wood enough rigidity that we can't twist it. And so I can stand on the edge of the wood and it doesn't twist. So the bracket's attached to this piece of wood with 4 screws, and it's attached to this piece of wood with 4 screws. So if we try to twist that, we can't because the bracket would have to rip out of there, or the other end of the wood would have to come up, which it can't because our wood support brackets are holding it in place. So this was the single bed assembly. If you were going to be connecting beds to this, putting multiple beds together, check out one of those videos